Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Bernstein, and I am the founder and director of the Bernstein Institute for Trauma Recovery. I'm also the one who has originated a program that we've put together over the years for caregivers. We call it Resilience and Renewal for Caregivers, and we also have an inspiring component of it called Lynn's Legacy, named after my wife, who passed away 3 years ago. And we took care of her for 4.5 years. She had cerebral vascular dementia. So when I'm talking, not just as a PhD in psychology or being a mentor and coach, but more as also a participant, I do understand what caregivers go through. I've been there and back, and I've helped many since then. I've been in the business of helping people with trauma recovery for over 50 years. And to be honest with you, since I've gotten involved with caregiving, it's given me a new inspiration for the rest of my career on how to help caregivers and families in need. We've learned how hard it is and difficult for families and loved ones and the professionals on the front lines taking care of those that are really sick. And we've learned from firsthand what it takes out of us and what it can do and how destructive it can be to the caregivers. There's a lot of good information, I want to say that, supporting caregivers out there. And I'm pretty familiar with most of it, or a lot of it. And what we do takes nothing away from it, but we have shed, I'd say, a new dimension on resilience for caregivers and for family members. I'll be honest with you, it comes from understanding how to help people through the effects of very serious trauma. To be a caregiver, we wind up giving an awful lot of ourselves, and energy and empathy and compassion and skills to folks that really cannot reciprocate. They're in the condition of needing to receive and be supported through their journeys. We've learned also that it takes a different model that we've explored and developed ourselves on finding a way of keeping caregivers well and healthy and resilient in spite of how difficult the work is. And that's quite an undertaking. But being that we've been there ourselves and we've helped so many since, we know how important this is. I've read a lot of very good work done. We incorporate some of it, but I'll be honest with you, our emphasis has been the impact of crisis and trauma on the body. And what I've learned as a caregiver and helping caregivers is we can teach all day long and give you the information you need to get some perspective and to get back on your feet after you've been drained and you're fatigued and depleted. But I'll tell you one thing that I've learned. A one-shot deal doesn't work. It's an ongoing process. And it is so easy to forget ourselves when we're dealing with someone who's so ill and so debilitated. So it's, as much as we know, and I can speak as a PhD with many years of experience, it comes to nothing when it comes to being on the front lines when you're dealing with very sick people and giving to them. And even if we talk about taking care of ourselves, which I do, and it's so important, it truly is easy to put ourselves aside, particularly if we're the empathic type of person. It's very easy to do it to the point where we neglect ourselves and allow ourselves to get drained and depleted. And all of this has been impacted on the body the whole time. But one of the things that I've learned and what I see is how easy it is to disconnect from our own bodies and the energy we're putting out because we're so busy caring for others. And the situations can be dire, and they're very difficult, as I know. And I want to say we've also seen the impact on families and how hard it is on families to deal with someone, a loved one. We've dealt with many different kinds of families. What we've learned is when we're dealing with someone who has dementia or stroke or deteriorating situation, we also wind up dealing with the different dynamics of families as well. And it can add a much more difficult kind of challenge to us. When families get exhausted and depleted, they begin to they go from being saddened at the loss, and I'll talk about that in a minute, to also being very resentful, and they start getting bitter and angry, not rationally, but it doesn't matter. What we've also seen is how hard they are on the frontline caregivers, and they start getting very critical and hard on them. And I've seen it many times, and it's a heartbreak, because people who are on the front lines doing this work are doing I consider it a high calling. It's a very sacrificial kind of work, and they deserve our appreciation and respect and support. And many times, to be honest with you, they're criticized, they're attacked, they're diminished, and it's not right. So we know that there's a lot of different aspects to training for caregivers and keeping them resilient. And I want to talk about a couple of them, a couple of things that really, principles that we have seen here that we really have a great deal of empathy for. And one of them is called ambiguous loss. It's a serious one. I remember when I was going through it myself. And it really is a form of grief. It's dealing with the deterioration and losing someone that you've cared about and loved and has been present. And they're going away, further and further away, until they finally pass away. And our grief gets pretty active. And I think grieving, I'll be honest with you, I think is one of the most difficult emotional states to deal with. When you're dealing with ambiguous loss, rationally you're saying, well, the person's still here. They're not gone yet. And yet the intensity of grief is overwhelming. So we've had to learn how to deal with and help people deal with the impact of ambiguous loss. And we feel that's a very important part of our training, not just for family members, but for the caregivers on the front lines as well. We know how important this issue is. We also pay attention to the deterioration of them physically and emotionally. And we've seen signs when people become what they call emotionally depleted and exhausted. And they begin to, there's symptoms and signs that start showing. A lot of the caregivers we know, to be honest with you, put on a lot of weight. They get more lethargic. They can't sleep at night. They're not doing well in their personal relationships anymore. As it progresses, they actually start to get very resentful. And even though they take a break from work for a weekend or whatever, those breaks don't seem to recover them well anymore. Then we know we're moving into something called the burnout stage. And I consider that much more serious. We have restored people that have been burned out. I want to tell you that. It's a big job, but we know how to do it. We know how to repair the body. We know how to restore the energy and the capacities and capabilities of the person. We've even taught them and learned ourselves how to thrive during this time, which I consider is you're surviving. It's a survival level. And yet I've seen more people begin to be inspired and thrive and find a new kind of health and purpose in their life they never had before. I'm not saying everybody can do it, but we've seen enough of it to know it's possible. Our training components address these issues and more. Also, in our training, we also teach people how to defend themselves, how to protect themselves a little bit. We call it pushing the pause button, where they don't allow even though they may be what we call triggered, and we all get that. In other words, we come as human beings that have our own flaws and our own pain. In this kind of work, it comes out. And if we don't get a handle on it, it begins to contaminate our work and actually interfere with our effectiveness of people who truly need it. So we work on that quite a bit. We know that triggering is not just an emotional state, it's also a physiological state. I've dealt with this in my work for many, many years. I really do not believe, after so many years of work, that you can sit and just counsel someone through the effects of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorders, that you have to deal with the damage that's been done to the nervous system and to the body too. My training and training others definitely has always involved that. I don't ignore it. And I feel it's very important to get a person to come back to themselves, to feel better than they did before. but to allow them to have the freedom to express their emotional state in a safe place, but also to refocus them. And usually that kind of thing has to do with drawing pain from their past in such a strong way that it begins to interfere with their effectiveness in their present lives, in their work, in their home lives, and whatever. We will let we know how to discharge it. We know how to get the nervous system back into a normal balanced state, but we also know that it's up to us to also bring them back to the present and help them focus on the present and find hope again. And we encourage them and we teach them. As long as we have an emotional clarity for these folks, and we can get that place, or we can get to that place when we clear the body of the energies that have accumulated, the negativity or whatever, we can begin to give them some new hope and restore them in better ways than they have ever been before. This again is not a one-shot deal. But when we deal with caregivers and folks that are really struggling, it moves me as somebody who's been in the field a long time. It gives me a new sense of purpose and meaning to my work and to my life. And also, it's taking care of my wife and developing the team approach to caregiving, which we did for my wife, has inspired me. And that's where Lynn's legacy has come in. We have podcasts. During the time that we were taking care of her, we became very inspired for Lynn's legacy. And our podcast went all over the world. And we were in touch with caregivers all over the world. So we're talking from a personal point of view. We're also talking from a professional point of view. And today we want to promote our new programs to not just to agencies, but to large companies that are now taking over elder care. And we know that it's a big business. We also know that there's a lot of hospice care programs as well. We want to address all of those, and we want to become a very important part and component of those programs. And we really hope that when we come forward with this, that we will be embraced, our new approach. We've been doing it a long time at the Bernstein Institute. Now it's time for us to reach out much more broadly. I want to also say one thing. I want to thank the caregivers for what they do and how they sacrifice and they give. They live what I call an extraordinary reality, where a lot of people would take a look and run the other way. These are the folks that plunge in there and go to the front lines and put up and give a lot, and they deserve our best efforts. That's what our new programs are for. We can also help agencies and companies that are running these programs. We can prevent burnout to the point where you lose good employees, which to replace them can be very costly. Anyway, I want to wish everybody the best. We are going to do a series of these videos, and we'll get much more specific with the different components of our program. But I want to say thank you for all that you're doing, and my heart is with you. Thank you again. God bless you.